Thanks, Todd. Now I'm craving barbecue and Tex-Mex. It is indeed good to have you all here. And good morning to the rest of you, whether you are joining us here in the sanctuary, whether you're joining us online. We want you to know that wherever you are this morning, that wherever you are on life's journey, that you are welcome here. You're not just welcome, you're wanted, that you're not just accepted, that you are loved as you are, not as you think you should be. So we're wrapping up a sermon series this morning that we're calling 18 Summers, and it started 4 weeks ago with the simple but unsettling truth, and that is that every parent is handed a sacred gift, and that is 18 summers. 18 seasons to shape a heart, to plant seeds of faith, to model a life that is centered on God. We've been asking one question, that is, what are the essential principles that we hope to instill in our children? What do we most want our children to carry with them when they leave home, when they navigate through the world? Another way to say that is, what do we hope our kids catch from watching our lives? First week, we talked about what it means to put faith first, above everything else, before everything else, to put those big rocks in first. The second week, we talked about the importance of loving God with all that you are, not as a habit, but as something that is genuine, that is personal. We talked about having a thirsty relationship with the living God and to let them see us thirst. Last week, we talked about the importance of loving everyone. Not just those that are easy to love, but everyone, and to love everyone with a love that looks like Jesus. This morning, as we wrap it all up, we're going to talk about the importance of following Jesus and not the crowd. Because the courage to choose the better way, even when everything around us is pulling us in a different direction. And I do want to say, before I go any further, that this series has been framed in a lot of ways around parents and children, but it was never only for parents and children. That it's for every mentor, every teacher, every coach, every aunt, uncle, grandparent, every person that may hope to have children someday and are starting to think about what are those habits, what are those rituals, those ways of being. This is for them too. Because the faith that gets caught doesn't just come from home, it comes from community, it comes from all of us. And the other thing that I've been saying throughout this series is that the timing of this is not coincidence, that it has been for me deeply personal, that I started this series on just the other side of the 18 summers because our youngest, Caroline, turned 19 just a couple of weeks ago. Our son Jake is starting law school in the fall. Ella is adulting with a new job with Nike in Oregon. Abby is heading to North Carolina to start her teaching career next month. And so I tell you all that as a way of saying, look how good I've done, but as a way of acknowledging, oh my God, it's hard. And so with all the humility, with all the compassion I can muster. And yes, it is hard. And let me give you an example of just how hard it can be and how short those summers can be, because Kelly and I started at the beginning of the year to think that this summer would be the last chance that we would have to get all 4 of our kids together to have one last hurrah, one last summer vacation, and we all pulled out our calendars and couldn't find a single time when we could all get together. So our last family vacation may have been last summer, which means that Kelly and I are going on vacation next week, just the 2 of us. And I got to tell you, we're not mad about that. Then it turns out the other side of those 18 summers isn't so bad either. But before we get there, there's one more Sunday, one more week of asking, what is it that we are passing on? What are they catching? And where do we find the courage to choose the better way, even when the crowd is pulling hard in another direction? Now, our text this morning, we're going to read just one, and it's very short. It's one of the most direct and one of the most countercultural commands in all of Paul's writing. He's writing to the community in Rome, which was one of the most powerful cities in the world, surrounded by the values and the pressures of that Roman culture. And he says in that moment, do not be conformed to this world. So I invite you to hear these words now from Romans chapter 12.
Today's reading comes from Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Here begins the reading. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, on the basis of God's mercy, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable act of worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Here ends the reading, the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who I quoted a couple of weeks ago, he once wrote a short essay simply entitled, "The Crowd is Untruth." The Crowd is Untruth. It wasn't published until after he died in 1859, but in many ways, even though it was written so many years ago, it could be written for this moment. And here's what he said in that essay, The Crowd is Untruth. There is a view of life which holds that where the crowd is, there is truth. And there's another view of life that says wherever the crowd is, there is untruth. He would then go on to say, the crowd is untruth. Therefore, Christ was crucified because Jesus would have no dealings with the crowd. A little bit later in his essay, he said, every individual who flees into the crowd contributes his own share of cowardice to the cowardice which is the crowd. The crowd is untruth. The crowd is cowardice. It doesn't just pressure you to conform, it gives you cover for it. And it's into that world that Paul says, don't be conformed to this world, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Think your way into a new way of living. The crowd has always been loud, hasn't it? The pressure to conform has always been real, and the cost of stepping outside has always felt high. Came across a story years ago when I was doing youth ministry. The story was written by Daniel Taylor in a book called Letters to My Children. He's writing letters to his son. And in it, he tells the story of when he was in the 6th grade, an event that happened back then. Back when he was in the 6th grade, they did square dancing. I don't know if they still do square dancing in the 6th grade. God, I hope they still don't do square dancing in the 6th grade. They did when I was in the 6th grade. But when they would do square dancing, they had this thing that would happen where the boys would all line up in the front of class, and one at a time, each boy would choose a girl to be a partner with. And the girls just sat at their desks and they waited. Now I want you to pause for just a moment and try to put yourself in the shoes of those girls, waiting to be chosen, watching to see everyone else who was chosen before you, wondering if you were going to be picked at all. Well, there was a girl in his class. He calls her Mary, who everyone knew was going to be chosen last. Not because of anything she'd done, but just because that's where the crowd placed her. Because that's how crowds work. They establish a hierarchy and everyone knows the rules and nobody questions them. Now, I don't know if they still do square dancing, but that part is still true today. There is a hierarchy. Nobody questions the rules, but everybody knows them. Well, Daniel's teacher, Miss Owens pulled him aside one day as they were heading out of class and said, "Dan, the next time that we do square dancing, I want you to choose Mary." Well, Dan said it felt like he was being asked to fly to Mars. That would have been easier than to choose Mary. And then he said, she did something really, really horrible. And that is that Miss Owens said that that's what a Christian would do. And he knew immediately in that moment that he was doomed because he knew she was right. For the next several days and maybe even weeks, he agonized over it. And then the day came, and of course, he was hoping that he was going to be last. And so when he chose Mary last, nobody would think the same thing. But, well, you can guess what happened. He went first. And he stood there with his heart pounding and every eye in the room on him. He took a deep breath. And with a weak and unsure voice, he said, "I choose Mary." And in that moment, Mary lifted her head, and on her face was the most genuine look of delight, of surprise, of dignity that he had ever seen. It was pure, it was unguarded. He said, "In that moment, I had to look away because I knew that I didn't deserve that look." And then he said this, "Never has reluctant virtue been so rewarded." Dan never saw Mary after that year. She moved away. He has no idea whatever became of her life, but he has never forgotten that face. Now, before I move on, I just want to say to every person in this room who has ever felt like a Mary, who has ever sat wondering if they were going to be picked at all, I just want you to know that this story is not about Dan's heroism. The story is not about Dan's heroism. It's about a crowd that had created that hierarchy and someone who found the courage, maybe fueled by guilt, to step outside of it, to refuse to let the crowd's rules be the last word. Because I would argue that that's what following Jesus looks like. It's what it looks like in the 6th grade. It's what it looks like every single day, to refuse to let the crowd's rules be the last word. In our time this morning, I want to do something. I want to name some of the crowds that are pulling the hardest right now. I'm going to name 3. I could name probably 100, but I'm going to name 3. And I've chosen these because I think our kids are swimming in them. And if we're honest, I think we all are. The first one has to do with sports betting. Because sports betting right now has exploded, and it's found its primary market in young men. I did some research this last week, and I found a survey that surveyed all of the students in one school, found that nearly 3 out of 4 young male students had already placed a bet online. 3 out of 4. Underage, on their phones. Think about that for a minute. 3 out of 4. Someone described it as putting a casino in your pocket. One of the most addictive behaviors known to humanity, combined with the most addicting device ever created. And it is pulling young men towards financial ruin, towards addiction, towards shame. It is doing it quietly, it is doing privately while life passes them by. And I can make the argument that why it's gotten so bad, and that is that we have made it almost impossible to watch sports at all without being sold gambling. Right? DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, they don't just advertise during the games, they sponsor them. And they're on the broadcast, they're on their jerseys sometimes, they're in the stadium. The crowd isn't just pulling, it's being amplified by billions of dollars. I had lunch this last week with Austin Schmidt, our minister of college students. And we were talking about this, and I told him that I was going to mention this in my sermon, and I asked him if this was something he ever butted up against. And he goes, oh yeah, it's a thing. It's a big thing. And it's a huge problem. While we were having lunch, the World Cup was going on, some screens just right next to our table. And at one point, somebody scored, and everybody turned and watched, and we were looking to see who it was and all that time. And about that time, our server, our waiter, came over, young man, probably 18, 20 years old. And he looked to see what we were looking at, and he goes, "Do you guys have money on the game?" "I'm betting on all the games," he said, and he walked away. And I looked at Austin in that moment, and I thought, that poor guy, he has no idea that he just became a sermon illustration at University Christian Church. Now, you've probably been following the Brandon Sorsby story, a young man from Denton, Texas, grew up not far from here, one of the most talented quarterbacks in all of college football, set to play this year at Texas Tech for millions of dollars. His future looked limitless. And then the word got out that he had placed thousands of dollars on bets on his phone, $90,000 wagered over 4 years, including bets on his own team, a career, at least for now, that is gone. Well, he checked into rehab. He's trying to get his life back. And I want to be clear. I'm as big a Horned Frog fan as there is. I'm not trying to pile on Brendan Sorsby. And I hope and I pray that he finds his way through this. But here's what this story tells us, is that this is not a distant problem. It's not happening somewhere else. It's happening right here in Texas to a kid who grew up down the road with a phone in his hand and an app that never changes, that never closes. And the crowd says, everybody's doing it. This is just what sports fans do now. There's a way of looking at the world that says where the crowd is, there is truth. There's another way that says where the crowd is, there is untruth. Well, there's another crisis among young men right now that the church can no longer afford, and I think we can call it toxic masculinity. Now, Scott Galloway is a professor at NYU. He's not a person of faith, and he is someone that I don't always agree with. But he's been sounding the alarm on this for years. He's written a new book called Notes on Being a Man, and he said this. He said, "Boys and men are in crisis. Rarely has a cohort fallen further and faster. 1 in 7 men reports having no friends. Men account for 3 out of every 4 deaths of despair in America." And it's into that void, that loneliness, that lostness, that hunger for purpose and for identity that other voices have rushed in, voices that tell young men that strength means dominance, that real men, they just take what they want, that vulnerability is a weakness, that the way to be a man is to make yourself bigger by making other people around you feel smaller. Friends, that's not strength. That is fear dressed up as power. But here's what I want every young man in this room to hear right now, and here's what I want every parent of a young man to know, and that is that we believe something different here. One of the core values of this congregation is vulnerability, and that is the courage to be known, to be honest, to show up as you actually are, rather than how you think people want to see you. You see, we believe that that's not weakness. We believe that that's exactly what courage looks like. It was Jesus. It was Jesus who said, "The greatest among you will be the one who learns how to serve." Not the most dominant, not the most powerful, not the most feared, the one who serves. You see, real strength, Jesus' kind of strength, doesn't need to make anybody else feel smaller. It's secure enough to do something like choose Mary. It's courageous enough to serve. It's confident enough to be kind in a very unkind world. That's the better way. And our sons are watching to see if we really believe it. And every young person is watching to see what real strength really looks like. There are some that say where the crowd is, there is truth. There are some that say where the crowd is, there is untruth. The third one that I want to talk about is what we might call the comparison culture that is fueled by social media. Because the crowd is telling your kids, and if we're honest, it's telling all of us that our worth is measured by what we achieve. That your grades, your job title, how much money you make, how many people are watching, how many likes you get. That every post is a performance, every photo is a highlight reel, that every like is a verdict on your value. Jonathan Haidt, whose research on the anxious generation that we talked about in our last series, he describes social media and what it's done to young people this way. He says, it has given them all the vulnerabilities of a popularity contest, but now the contest, it never ends, and everyone can see the score. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the scoreboard is always up. Church, our worth isn't measured by what we achieve. It's measured by how deeply we love, how we treat people with kindness, how we get up when life knocks us down. And the crowd may choose money and fame and success, but when it's all said and done, the only thing that lasts is the love that we give. The people who matter most, they don't care about our resume. They just care whether we showed up, whether we loved in those moments when it was hard to love. You've heard me say before, long before this series, that here in this church, that we never want to teach our children anything that they will need to unlearn later. And this morning, I want you to feel the full weight of that, because the crowd is teaching our kids things that they will spend years unlearning. And it's everything that we just named, the bets, the posts, the pursuit of dominance, the scoreboard that never goes dark. Because there is an antidote, there is an alternative, there is a better way, and that is following Jesus and not the crowd. Not because it's easier, it almost never is. Dan's heart was pounding when he chose Mary. But it has always been worth it. As he said, never has reluctant virtue been so rewarded. So may we put the big rocks in first. May they see us thirst for God. May they see a love that looks like Jesus as we try to model a courage to choose the better way. Not performance, not perfection, but a willingness week after week, year after year, summer after summer, to refuse to let the crowds have the last word. Now, I told you that for Kelly and me, our 18 summers are now in the rearview mirror. And our kids are grown and flown, and none of them are here this morning. But I've been thinking a lot, as you can imagine. I've been thinking a lot this summer about what I most want my kids to know. And first and foremost, I want them to know just how proud of them I am. How proud I am of each and every one of them, not because of what they've achieved, though I am proud of that too, but because of who they are becoming. The way they love people, the way they show up, the way they keep choosing the better way, even when the crowd is loud. And that God knows, and they know too, that I didn't always get it right. That there were times when I was too busy, that I was too distracted, that I was too anxious to be fully present, and I'm so sorry. But more than anything, I hope they caught something, not by not from what I said, but from how I tried to live and showing them that following Jesus really is worth it, that love is the only thing that lasts, that the courage to choose is the better way, even when it costs you something. That's the most important thing that I know. And I hope, above all else, they know how much I love them. 18 summers. 18 summers, that's what you get. And what you model, the faith, the love, the character, the courage to choose the better way, that's what they carry with them the rest of their lives. So every conversation, every ordinary moment, every time you choose the better way, even when the crowd was loud, they were watching. They were watching, and something in that moment was being caught. Friends, the years are short. But the last lessons, they last forever. So may we go and live lives. May we go live a faith that is worth catching.